Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's event. My name is Alexandria Hoffman. I'm a flute alum of the New World Symphony, and I'm also executive director for Sound Mind, an organization that seeks to cultivate wellness in the classical music world. Thank you all so much for being here today. It's really exciting to see this all come together. I'd love to start with a short personal story. When I was in college, I struggled a lot with depression and anxiety, and I treated it mostly as a private journey. And with all of the stigma around mental health, I didn't feel it was really appropriate to discuss, especially as it related to my career, and I kept everything pretty private. Around 2019, I was lucky enough to connect with fellow musicians in the Civic Orchestra of Chicago who shared my experience, and we believed in the power of telling and sharing stories. And because of this newfound community, I felt a lot less alone. Thus, Sound Mind was born. As I mentioned, our organization seeks to cultivate wellness in the classical music world, and we do that in a number of ways. Our podcast and blog showcase stories in our community. Our workshops all across the country discuss a variety of topics, things like holding space, redefining failure and success, and much more. We have our annual event, of which this is the third iteration, the first in-person iteration, to dive more deeply into topics with professionals. And all of these are to create community and hold space for these important conversations around wellness in our field. Today, we're all here to talk about the important intersection of classical music, wellness, and identity because we believe that there are many different ways to be an artist, and we want to honor and value that. I'll talk more about the theme of today's event prior to our panel, but first I want to talk about our partner, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. In thinking about partners for this event, NAMI was a no-brainer. During the pandemic, I was looking for work, as musicians, as we know, could not work. And I was really passionate about mental health and education, and I actually worked for a year for the NAMI chapter in the suburbs of Chicago in their education department. I learned so much during this time, and I loved this work, and I love this organization, which is why we wanted to partner with them today. So to tell you more about NAMI, it's my pleasure to introduce Rosa Andrews, the Outreach and Communications Director of NAMI Miami-Dade. Please welcome Rosa.
Thank you so much, Alex, for including us. We're so grateful to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. The reality is that we partner with everyone in our community to be able to raise awareness about mental health. As Alex was sharing, NAMI stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and our mission is clear. We want to provide free support, education, and advocacy around mental health in our community. I was sharing before with Alex a couple months ago when we started planning this wonderful event, how every time that we go into any of our programs, especially with the youth, and we talk about mental health and trying to open that conversation with a program that we have called Ending the Silence, our youth, when we ask them what they do to take care of their own mental health, they raise their hands and they say that they listen to music. So that's the connection, right? We're connecting with each other. So NAMI, all of the NAMIs, right? We're the largest peer-led mental health organization in the United States. What we want to do is to be able to provide that support, and we do that by providing free support groups, ongoing support groups here in NAMI Miami-Dade, but in each of the NAMIs, and we do it for peers, and we define peers as anyone with a mental health condition or a mental health struggle, because we don't ask for a diagnosis. Sometimes that's the first step, the first time that they're reaching out, because they're recognizing some of those signs and symptoms that they're struggling. And the reality is that 1 out of 5 people have a mental health condition or a mental health struggle, and less than 49% of those people get any type of support. And why is that? Because of stigma. And we like to use that word often. And what does it mean when we say stigma? It means that we attach a negative belief to a group of people. And we do that with people that have mental health conditions and illness. And we need to stop doing that and create that awareness while providing that support and providing education. We also have educational programs for peers, for family members. That's how NAMI started. 2 mothers on a kitchen table back in 1970, around late 70s. They had 2 sons with a mental health condition, and as family members, they were struggling. They didn't have any support as parents, as siblings, as loved ones. So that's how NAMI came about, and now we're in each of the states, and we keep growing. Here in South Florida, we have 3 NAMIs. We have NAMI Palm Beach, we have NAMI Broward, and we have NAMI Miami-Dade. So I'm lucky enough to be a part of my community to make sure that everyone knows about all the free resources available to them. We have a helpline. We raise awareness about suicide. We are QPR, Question, Persuade, and Refer, suicide and awareness training, and many other programs for youth, for families around our community. So we have a table. If you look at our table, we have all the information there. And I will invite you to stop by, check all our resources, have that conversation, and connect to each other, because it starts with sharing our own story. We all have lived experience. I come from a Hispanic background. I always had anxiety growing up. I didn't know how to ask for help. Every time this sounds like a joke, but every time I will reach out to my parents or a trusted adult and say that I was feeling anxious, they, out of love, will tell me to go outside. So I was anxious, but outside. Or they fed me food, which was great. I still love food, especially if you give me a cookie, that will help a lot of my feelings, but that wasn't really the support that I needed. So this is something, I have loved ones with mental health conditions. I've been lucky enough to attend many of our programs, and it have helped me support my loved ones while also taking care of my own mental health. We also know that many studies show that more than 73% of musicians have a mental health struggle or a mental health condition symptom. And the reality is that what we all have in common is that we all have mental health. It's the same as physical health. We all have it, we all need to take care of it, and one can work without the other. So thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to be here, to be able to raise awareness about mental health, and of course, to share how much music impacts all of us every day, and it supports our well-being, but we also need to take care of ourselves first. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. As Rosa mentioned, there's a table, a NAMI table in the back with lots of resources, and you're also going to hear from Rosa in just a little bit on our panel. But first, I want to introduce our composer for our commission piece today, Grace Ann Lee. This is our 3rd commission piece that SoundMind has done, and we were really happy to partner with New World on this co-commission. And when we commission a work, we like to have a piece written by an underrepresented composer that resonates with our mission to cultivate mental wellness. And it was really clear in conversations with Grace Ann that she really cared about our mission and really resonated with what we were talking about. And just through getting to know her and now seeing the piece come to life, which you will in just a few moments, it's beautiful, it's very heartfelt, and it's very real, and I think it represents really well everything we're going to be talking about today. So to introduce her piece herself, we'd like to welcome Grace Ann Lee. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Grace Ann Lee. I'm a composer and a doctoral student at the University of Michigan. I just wanted to say quick words about my piece. I don't usually write long program notes, but because my commission was calling for raising awareness for mental health amongst musicians, I wanted to share my personal story. In January of this year, after completing my commissioned solo piano piece, I found myself completely burnt out. I had been struggling with severe insomnia for a year and a half, waking up around 5 times each night. Since starting my doctorate, I've taken on multiple roles: composer, student, and instructor, just trying to navigate being a 20-something in it all. As my career as a composer started flourishing, I found myself constantly chasing deadlines. Anxious and addicted to work, I lost the sense of being able to rest, always feeling tired, always feeling as if I was being chased by something. In Michigan, I started visiting my cousin Audrey's relatives, an old couple who are technically not related to me, every Saturday. They have been taking care of me, almost like they have adopted me. One day, the old lady, whom I call my grandmother, noticed the heavy bags under my eyes and me drifting, unable to focus on our conversations. Understanding the seriousness of my insomnia, she told me I needed to rest, and I told her I had forgotten how to. That night, my grandmother prayed for me and told me to let go. I cried so much in that conversation from restlessness and from the love and care she has given me, even when she wasn't obligated to. I took the entire January off from writing, taking walks, reading, really connecting with my friends, and visiting places that I had been putting off. Every Saturday, my cousin Audrey and I visited my grandparents, and we spent time just taking naps, making food, singing traditional Korean music, and laughing and crying. This piece is written right after this period of finding the value in learning to rest. So now talking about the music. Each movement is linked by the overarching concept of creating intervals of rest with varied musical expressions. The first movement portrays my struggles with insomnia, with quiet thoughts and ideas interjecting in and out, interrupting the space of sleep and calm. At the same time, it also represents the warmth of the small moments spent with my grandparents, cousin, and my friends that helped me through my time of insomnia and anxiety. The middle second movement, Become Light, reflects my hope that by creating every flicker, every spark of small moments, we can nurture them to grow into light, passing on warmth and encouraging each other to connect and find rest. The third is inspired by the words of my grandmother, and that by letting go, my worries and thoughts have become lighter, musically carried out in a humorous and fun way. I would like to thank Alex and SoundMind for organizing all of this. It's been such a pleasure experiencing the talent of these really talented musicians here on stage with me. I would like to thank New World Symphony for gifting me this trip. I love the beach, and that's where I'll be until Tuesday. That's where you'll find me. And lastly, I would love to thank my grandparents in Dexter, Michigan, whom I dedicate this piece to and who became the inspiration behind this piece. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi again, everyone. Thank you. One more round of applause for Grace Ann Lee's piece and the performers. Well done. So, as you know, this event is called Between the Notes, Exploring Identities as Artists, because we wanted to explore the multifaceted career paths of artists. Exploring my own identity and career path for the last several years, I've been questioning this. I struggled a lot with asking myself how much longer I could keep taking orchestra auditions, whether I'd be fulfilled in this career path if I didn't win an orchestra job, or whether I'd be fulfilled in my life if I chose something else. It sometimes felt like as I had more success in my career, I was having just as many setbacks that made me question my path. While I turned to my support network to help me sort through all these things, one thing I learned was that many people felt similarly to me, but no one wanted to talk about it. Because of this, I felt it was important to bring this topic of identities as artists to light, and now I would love to welcome our panel up. So first we have, again, welcoming back Rosa Andrews, the Outreach and Communications Director for NAMI Miami-Dade, Melissa Nahn, the President and CEO of the American Composers Orchestra, Laurab Raphael, Founder and Artistic Director of Hearing in Color, and Marta Siebenhaar, Founder of The Business Healer. Please give them a warm welcome. Welcome. It's so nice to see you all in person after emailing with all of you for a while. Thank you so much for being here. So one of the ways that we start all of our Sound Mind meetings, and the people here from Sound Mind know this, we start every meeting, every board meeting, every team meeting, the same way with asking the question, how's your head and how's your heart? And it's just a way to sort of check in with how everybody's doing. So I'll ask each of you briefly, how's your head and how's your heart? Marta, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. Always great to be back at New World Symphony. I've been part of this family. My head is clear and my heart is full. Thank you.
Hello, good to be here. I feel very similar. My head is clear being here in this beautiful weather that Miami is having. I'm from Chicago, so we don't get this too often. And my heart is also full. I've had a full day of speaking with friends and loved ones, so I feel very held.
Thank you. I'm also really happy to be here. My head is clearer after the last couple hours spent in the ocean. And, you know, my heart is a little heavy. There's a lot going on right now in the orchestra space, and I'm holding that, but it's lovely to be here.
I don't want to copy the same answer, but I have a clear head. The weather helps. It's beautiful out in Miami, and my heart, it's really full every time I get a chance to join our community and talk about mental health. So thank you.
Thank you all. Now I'd like to ask each of you, what brings you here today and what made you interested in this discussion at the intersection of identity and art? Let's start this time with Melissa, and we'll each go down. Or sorry, we start with Rosa, and then we'll each go down.
So what really made us want to be here is the fact that we are all a community. When we talk about mental health, it's just one community. We all have mental health. So the chance to be able to hear from different musicians and everyone in this particular group or community, it allows us to make sure that we're reaching out to them and offering our resources to them, but also making sure that we learn what spaces are needed. So thank you for allowing us to do that.
I'm just really glad to be back here. Thank you for inviting me. I think for me, it's a really important subject. I completely identified with what you said at the start of today. You know, when I first went to music school, I was so physically and mentally injured. I had to take 3 months off within my first semester. And, you know, it's a beautiful thing we do, but we sometimes do it in a very ill way. And I think that it's really good for us to talk about that, because so much of how we think we need to get ahead as musicians is in showing strength and perfection and preparation. And there's a lot to say about being able to show up as you are and having a space with which you can be supported in doing that. So looking forward to today.
Wow, I'm very glad to be here. I think there are many reasons why I was so interested in this conversation. Mainly, I went to a private white institution in Chicago, and I felt like there was so little space for me already. And so the topic of mental health was just not something that I could be focused on for the sake of trying to survive that environment. Furthermore, I think as a Black man growing up in my own community, there was no talk of mental health. And so finding those spaces where I felt comfortable talking about it, seeking a therapist and things, I think these are very important things that we should consider, both as musicians and as humans in general.
Well, I'm here today to receive, to learn, and to share. I went to music school myself, and I was told orchestra or failure. And my teacher still says to me, I'm a failure. And no pressure, y'all, right? That's a lot for a young person. So at the time that I was in music school, I actually learned energy healing. And it was something that in the late 90s, people did not talk about that in public. This was not something that we were thinking about as a tool. Reiki was not a thing. Yoga wasn't even a thing, right? So when we think about all the tools that are available now to help people get in touch with all sorts of sides of themselves, including mental health, I think it's important that we normalize the conversations about what's happening in the inner world, because it really impacts the outer world and how we show up. So that's why I'm here today, and what I'm hoping to learn and contribute to and share. Thank you.
Thank you all. That's great. I'd like to talk a little bit about mental health in the classical music field, sort of in general. Rosa mentioned the studies that we cite a lot in Sound Mind. There was a 2018 study in the UK of just musicians in general that found 71% of musicians have suffered from panic attacks and or high levels of anxiety, 68% have suffered from depression, and that musicians might be 3 times more likely to experience something like depression. And NAMI cites the study all the time that 1 in 5 US adults experience mental health conditions every single year. So my first question, this can go to any of you, is how do the demands of a career in classical music impact the mental health and well-being of musicians? Or what do we think is the cause of these really high numbers and kind of alarming numbers when you think about it? Who would like to kick us off?
I'll start by saying I think we, classical musicians in particular, we exist in an environment that already confines us to a very strict path. So bringing in your identity, bringing in your personality, the things that worry you, it seems like there's no room, again, to bring in anything further than what you can practice, what you can perform. And it is sort of emphasized, and as you're saying, you're either praised or, not praised for being able to follow that very strict path.
Thank you. Anyone else?
There's so many ways into this, and it's hard to figure out which door to choose. I tend to introduce myself these days as a recovering piccolo player. And a lot of that just had to do with the idea that I realized after a certain point that I was basically an athlete of tiny muscles. Do you know what I mean? And people looking at what we do from the outside would say, oh, what a creative endeavor, what a joyful endeavor. The job is very different from that, actually. And there's a really great book by Ian McGilchrist. He's a neuroscientist. And he looks at what's actually happening in the brain when you play music. Most people are exercising the creative part of their brain. If you are a professional classical musician, you are probably exercising the analytical part of your brain because you are learning and repeating the same things over and over and over again to perfection. And to me, there's a lot in there because the very tools that we have always used, like every indigenous society on earth has music making as part of it, how it heals the body, how it passes language, how it touches the spirit. But it is not done in the way we do music professionally here. Does that make sense? It's participatory, it's not performative. It's about connecting, it's not about achievement. Everything is different about how we've chosen to do this. And it's a relatively new invention, this thing that we call classical music here in this country. So there's a lot going on there and much more to say. But I think I'll kind of leave it at first with that we have used the tools that are necessary for well-being, and we've shifted the way we do them in such a way that it is making us less well.
Last thought here. Being a professional musician is stressful. Can we all acknowledge that if everyone in the audience knows how it's supposed to go, and you know how it's supposed to go, there's stress behind that. Like, I have to perform to this perfection quality. And I remember one of my first weeks, I was like, I'm gonna talk to my teacher. This is my favorite recording. I'm gonna ask him all about it, learn how did he come up with that? And he's like, I don't know where that even came from. That was over the course of 7 nights and 8 rehearsals. I was like, oh, okay. He's like, I don't know how I played that either because it happened in the lab. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I never played it that way. And I was like, wow, musicians are held to high standards that maybe are not even authentic sometimes. I know we're getting into the world of AI, but it's stressful, right? I remember learning how to breathe when I was resting, when I could see the music and you see time is counting down and you're like, okay, 2 measures before, 1 measure before, and you have to perform the small athletic stuff on call. That is stressful. And I think that it's also the amount of work you have to learn in such a short amount of time. I had spreadsheets. I had charts on the wall of everything I needed to prepare for my lessons, chamber music, festival preparation, all of this, and let alone auditions. I always say, like, if you work with musicians, they're business managers, they're project managers. They know how to do so many things. And then they're also artists. It's like, wow. But all of that, I feel like if there's no rest ever, it's very stressful and we don't know how to be on or off. So I find that watching musicians be on, like, what do you do to chill out at night? What do you do to like come down from that concert high? That's the stuff we don't learn in school. And I think it's important to think about. But yeah, the stress for me, like, why do so many of us have challenges? Stress is number one in my mind.
Yeah, thank you for that. And to your point of asking musicians how we sort of come down from things, I always love asking musicians what their hobbies are. Often I find they don't have any. And it's something I always encourage people to sort of nurture in their lives to create some kind of sense of balance. Yeah, thank you for that. It's really insightful. Rosa, I want to sort of ask you, what are some signs or symptoms that might indicate someone's struggling with their mental health, and how can colleagues or support networks effectively help?
Thank you for that question. It's a wonderful question, but what we need to keep in mind is we're all unique. And I like to stress that because we can have the same mental health condition and it will show up different from me to the next person, right? So with that in mind, any changes of mood, behavior, sleep patterns is a big one. And I mentioned this because I was lucky enough to, before this event, I met a musician 4 days ago in one of our events, and he shared that he wasn't sleeping well. Out of nowhere, he started to have trouble sleeping, and he was wondering if that was a symptom that it was a mental health struggle. And I tell everyone, it depends. Is it preventing your daily activities? Because sometimes it's hard for us to sleep if we have a lot in our mind, sometimes stress, right? And we all have stress. I'll often like to mention, depending on the circumstance, right? We can be going through a hard time. And of course, our sleep is going to be affected. But it's something that is ongoing for more than 2 weeks, and it's preventing you to have your daily activities, to enjoy what you used to enjoy, then you should definitely ask for support and talk to someone about it. So, when we talk about behaviors, again, they're all different, but when it's something that you haven't seen before and it's longer than 2 weeks, then you should be able to reach out and talk to someone and get support. So I invite you to, whenever something feels off, and we have to learn to know ourselves and to check with ourselves. We're always being caregivers and asking everyone how they're doing, but oftentimes we forget to do that to ourselves. So I always, and I like to point this out, I wear this bracelet, and I use it as a reminder. It's one of our NAMI bracelet, it has our helpline, but to me, it's just a reminder to, when I see it, just check in. A couple of minutes, 1 minute, whatever that takes, but how am I doing? How am I feeling? And then go on with my day, whatever I'm doing. And if I'm not okay, just stop and see what I can do about it. Who can I talk to? What resources can I actually reach out to? Talk to, a psychologist, psychiatrist, go to a support group, whatever's needed, but check with yourself.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Thanks for that. And obviously, we have the table in the back, and we'll talk about resources also later. Shifting now to talking more about identity. We talked about this before a little bit, but there's a lot of stigma surrounding pursuing what we consider to be this non-traditional path in music, meaning there's a lot of stigma around doing anything in the musical field other than having a tenured position performing full-time. Notice that none of the people on this panel are tenured orchestral musicians, and that was on purpose. I really wanted to dig into these non-traditional, what we consider non-traditional paths, but also just hear about their journeys. So my first question is, why do you think this non-traditional path is stigmatized, and how can we better support people who have these really multifaceted careers like all of you? So let's start with the first part. Why do we think that this non-traditional path is stigmatized? We sort of touched on this before.
Well, at the beginning of the 1900s, we established a way of making music in this country that was based on European ways of making music. And therefore, we created opera companies and orchestras, and we needed to create educational institutions to train towards those. It's the same way that medical schools were created, where like we medicate, but we don't talk about exercise and diet. So for us to have a singular path, it's almost as if we were designed that way, you know? And there has to be a way of measuring whether or not you're successful. So the way of measuring right now is, did you get that orchestra job? Did you get into that opera company? Did you get that academic post? These are also tenured positions, by the way. So like you mentioned the word tenure. It's definitely a structure that has its problems, you know, and especially with everything that we've been hearing about over the last week in the news, tenure creates sometimes a lack of accountability that makes it extremely easy for people to believe that they are immune to any sort of consequence for their behavior and action, which has enormous consequences for everyone that they work with. So all of that is to say, how is it narrow? It's because we designed it that way. And the reality of the world is that there has always been a musical biodiversity that we have enjoyed in this country and around the world. And for us to know that that is there and honor it and recognize that there is a path for musicians who want to do what we all have done, what many other musicians have done, which is find their own way. In some cases, you might find your own way and find yourself even more valuable to the world around you, because there are many people who could sit and play oboe in that chair, but only you can bring together that thing that is most special about the way that you do your work and what your public most can benefit from in terms of contact with you. So all I can say is I highly encourage people to do that exploration, because the fruits at the end are really worth it.
Thank you very much. You haven't, I would love to give you all the opportunity to tell us just a little bit about your musical journey and what navigating that journey was like for you and sort of how you ended up where you are now. So Marta, if we could start with you, that would be great.
Sure. I have 2 degrees in music from Manhattan School of Music. I have a bachelor in oboe, and I have my master's in orchestral performance. I was very thrilled halfway through my master's degree to have an opportunity to sub with one of the top 5 orchestras in the world, or at least in this country, in my opinion. And I got to that first rehearsal, and I walked on stage, and I was like, oh, yeah, I don't think I can do this for a living. And still had half my master's to do. I was incredibly thrilled and felt very privileged to be on that stage. But I realized, like, this is not for me. Okay, warning bells, what do I do now? Uh-oh, life plan is like, uh-oh, orchestra failure. I guess I'll take failure. And I don't see it that way. But the thing is, in music, you're taught to follow authority. You're taught to really be open to criticism and to follow instructions, right? You're not taught to question your teacher. Oh, you can do that later, that's fine, but in your own time. And then the second thing is, as orchestral musicians, we are taught to blend in. We're taught to not ever draw attention to ourselves. And for me, there was a huge stigma in stepping out, and I felt the stigma from my peers more than anyone when I decided, like, I felt like I could not do that anymore. And again, I love orchestra music. It's still my favorite. Give me a Mahler symphony any day, right? But I realized that for me and for my own vehicle here, that was not my life purpose. That's not what actually made my heart sing as a job, right? Because the job and the professional practice and being tenured and all that and taking the auditions is very different from the love for music. And so what I learned is I'm going to feel judged by my colleagues because they're going to ask me, oh, how long has it been since you played? And I'm like, the training, I think, installs in us this like fear and trigger of like, what if you leave? Then people won't take you seriously. But the question is not necessarily that you're not going to be taken seriously, but to leave the system. What does it mean about you? Does it mean that you are drawing attention to yourself? Does it mean that you're inadequate? And all these things, I think, take incredible emotional and mental power to be able to transcend. Because when you leave the field, whatever that means, the big scary thing, it's really, everything else continues. And when you realize that nobody is actually judging and nobody's actually really even paying attention, but to feel so limited by like the path, and it's sacred and it's a beautiful thing. But when I realized it wasn't for me, I allowed myself to say, okay, well, what are the things that make my heart sing? What are the environments in which I feel like I'm valuable and I'm valued? My first job, man, I got to be creative in ways I hadn't been in years, just because I have a systems and process like engineering mind. I was like, these people don't have systems for things. I'm an oboist. I know how to do systems because I got to keep my reed production going, right? And what I found is like out there, they need people who can think for themselves, who are self-starters, who have the ability to follow through and do hard things, right? Our world needs this. And to have people who are willing to step out and follow their own vision, no one in music school gave me permission to do that. I had to find that in myself. But I would never look back because now I get to be in spaces, I get to be vulnerable, I get to hold space and love for people and the pain they've been through and help them reach the vision that's in their minds, step by step. And that is an incredible privilege and honor. No one gave me permission. I had to give myself permission, and I would do it all over again every time. And I keep reinventing myself. I used to work in this building doing marketing. Now I'm a healer and I incorporate energy healing with coaching. And like, what a cool thing to be able to do. I created that. I didn't wait for somebody to give me the job or to call me saying like, the gig's ready for you, come on. I had to create it. And for a classical musician in orchestra who is trained to never stand out, that was terrifying. And even now I'm just kind of like, oh, this is working, this is cool. But it takes courage, and we need people who have a vision to do a thing like you've done. Look, we're all here because of the vision in this person's mind. How powerful is that? So thank you for being courageous.
I love this idea of giving yourself permission. It's sort of, as I sort of transition career paths myself, I'm going back to school for clinical mental health counseling in the fall, but still very much plan on playing the flute and gigging and figuring out what that means to me. It's very selfishly validating to hear all of these things. So thank you so much for that. LaRob, would you like to tell us a little bit about your journey? What has your career path been like? You do so many cool things. Tell us about them.
So where do I begin? I always like to start here. I grew up in a very musical family. We all sang. If we had a dog, the dog would sing. And that was my training. My formal training really happened in my household with my grandma, with my mother, with my father, singing all the time. And that really just birthed my love for singing. And singing in any way. I mean, my mom and dad were a part of like a gospel group, and so I would always hear that sound and like, oh yes, we're singing in church, this is great. But as I got older, I started to love jazz, and I started to love R&B, and I would become attuned to what I was hearing on TV shows like Looney Tunes and opera, and I was like, whoa, what are these sounds? I want to be able to make those sounds. Until finally somebody was like, you can make those sounds, you know? And I was like, what, really? So I started studying classical voice, and I was like so fascinated with the idea that I could make so many different sounds with this. So that's how I got started in singing and training in high school, and then I came to Chicago to study at DePaul for vocal performance. And very quickly, life decided that it was gonna life. And that I actually didn't have as much control over what I wanted to do that I thought I did. And through different hardships, losing loved ones, becoming, deathly ill, were things that kind of happened to me where I was forced to sort of reckon with what it was I wanted to do with what I could do, actually. But I was still, again, thinking about classical music and the path. I was told that I was supposed to follow a path. So even in the midst of all of what I had been going through at the time, I decided that I was supposed to follow this path. And I went through it, young artist programs, the competitions, I was winning and things, and I was so unhappy. Everything, the awards, the young artist, I was traveling to Mexico and to Italy, and everything was on the outside really awesome. And I sat down and I was like, I have gotten so many things, and I come home at night and I am not happy. What is going on? And it was that I had lost the excitement about what it was that I could do with my voice. I had lost the understanding that what I was actually doing in church was communicating. I wasn't performing ever. You don't perform in church. You communicate. I was having a dialogue through this talent that I was gifted with. And I think the moment that I clicked into that was the moment that I realized that I had been doing something wrong for a long time, which was trying to follow this very strict path of, like you said, really studying the tiny muscles. And I wanted to get back to that. And I so love that you said, you know, you have to create the thing. And that's what I did. I left school, left the young artist programs, and even in that, I was thinking, there's so much music that exists out in the world that I haven't seen performed yet, particularly by Black and brown composers. Where's that space? And I decided, I'm gonna make the space. So Hearing in Color was formed, and through that, I started to get my hands dirty with arts administration, and then I started working at Lyric Opera Company, in their education and community engagement department. And now I'm on the radio. There's just so many different things that I feel like I've been able to do because I gave myself the permission to step outside of the path and hearken back to something that was always true to me. And I think sometimes we get so focused on that path that we forget that there was a reason why we started in the beginning. There was a reason why you picked up the oboe. There's a reason why you started playing piano. And I think if we remind ourselves of where we were when we first fell in love with the instrument, we can start to sort of wiggle that path a little bit, because that's the other thing that I had to learn, was that there are so many paths. I say to my friends all the time, you know, we were taught that this is the one path, but what they didn't say was that there would be doors along the way that you could walk through, and they would all take you back to where it was that you were supposed to go. So yeah, that's sort of how I lost track of the question, talking about all of this, but I say all of that to say, find the love, find what it was that brought you to your craft, to your talent, and it'll always lead you back home.
Thank you. Melissa, tell us a little bit about your musical journey and navigating that. That was like. I heard it. Fun fact: Melissa was on our panel event when it was over Zoom a few years ago. But you know, it's a new audience, so please share.
Here we go. Well, I mean, first things first. I have a Cambodian dad and a Brazilian mom, and one of the first things that I think about is that my love for doing things that are really weird comes from the idea that in my household, people didn't even speak the same language of love, and I got very comfortable with the idea of bringing things together that were unexpected. I mean, when I said that I wanted to go into music, my dad was like, I'm not paying for that. He was like, you can go into international science or international finance or hard science. Like, those are your options. But then I started winning auditions, and he was like, well, okay, you know. And Eastman was an amazing experience from the perspective that I was able to be in the 5th class, I believe, of the Arts Leadership Program, which at the time, you know, of course, I was getting my degree in flute performance, but also learning everything there was to know about the music field, both from a practical perspective and also in terms of the philosophy. And at the time, the message was classical music is dying, you know what I mean? Like, that was the echoing statement. And it's like, what are we gonna do about it? But to me, what was really fascinating is that I, as a person, needed a space for the fire hose that was my brain to go while I was also practicing my flute. As I said earlier, when I got to Eastman, it was one of the first times that I actually practiced with any regularity, so I was not okay physically at all. I didn't know how to do that. I got very injured, and I would puke for a week before any performance. Like, I would tear down my own recital posters so that people wouldn't come. It was that bad. Yeah, bad. But, you know, one of the things that I found really fascinating was that this opportunity to think about the state of the field and of the world and of the purpose of what we were doing led me to some very interesting experiences after school. So I landed at the Civic Orchestra of Chicago, and I've also played here at New World as a sub, which was really fun. But Civic was one of my first opportunities, and there was this program called Music Corps where they would send you out into community to teach or to play concerts. And I remember the first concert that I ever curated at Indian Boundary Park. It was the first time I realized I was playing in public for an audience that was not people who were there to adjudicate me or give me a job, or people who were there to make comments about me because they were trying to figure out if they were better than I were. They were just simply people. And this was a performance that was not about my own achievement. I wasn't getting anything out of it other than giving a gift. And there was this person there who came up and he was like, yo, you guys give good game face. And I'm like, what's that? And he's a Chicago firefighter. He was coming to his very first classical music event of all time. And the thing that he noticed was the way that we were looking at each other, the nonverbal communication. He's like, you know, when I run into a burning building every day and we can't talk to each other, that's life and death. That's what we do. And it made me really think the things that we prepare ourselves for are not the things that other people will take away. So I formed an organization called Fifth House Ensemble that was really dedicated to understanding what music could do in the world beyond performance or teaching someone else to perform. So that led us to the craziest kinds of collaborations, everything from bluegrass bands, tube and throat singers, interactive video game designers, but also multi-year research projects in social service settings, looking at how music composition and improvisation projects can impact personal development through the lens of social work. And that was some of the most beautiful music making of my life. I became a certified deep listening practitioner. And one of the things that's awesome about that practice, Pauline Oliveros is a composer who, if you have not gotten to know her, please get to know her music. She writes music in text scores, things like listen inside yourself, sing any note you hear, listen outside yourself, match any note you hear, alternate between those two instructions. You'd be astonished at the complexity and beauty of sound that can come from such a simple instruction. And making music in that way with people who don't call themselves musicians, the imagination, the connection, the emotional validation that comes from those spaces is beyond compare. And I'm going to close here because there's a lot to say, and I want to make sure other people have more time to say it. But you know that saying that says, if you can't do, teach, like that thing? I think part of the stigma is that people think that those of us who are up here who chose a different path couldn't do the typical one. And I just want to say up front, I had my first college teaching job when I was younger than some of my students. I was winning or in the finals of every orchestra audition I took when I founded Fifth House. This was not because I could not do it. It's because I looked out in the crowd and saw people taking the most expensive nap of their lives, and I was interested in another way.
Mic drop. That's amazing. Thank you. It's funny. I grew up also in Chicago as a young flutist. Knowing who Melissa was, you came and talked to the Northwestern Flute Studio once. And I remember being this like very bright-eyed sort of kid, and I was like, "That's so cool that you founded Fifth House." It was amazing. So I feel like I've known about Fifth House for such a long time. And Larab, who works for the classical music radio station in Chicago, WFMT, same thing. I grew up listening to it, and now seeing especially more people of color bringing a different sort of angle to the classical music station in Chicago. It's so refreshing and really cool. So it's great to have you all here. It makes me very happy. Thank you. Rosa, tell us a little bit about how you got into mental health work.
I'm just still trying to, everything that you guys have said, it's so inspiring. And what I hear from everything so far is how you took whatever, journey, or, it's not linear, whatever you learn, and you decided to give back to the community in different ways and to open that safe space to talk about mental health, which I just, thank you so much for doing that. How I got in this, I'm not gonna call it work, but mission, because it is a life mission, is the fact that I used to work in the corporate world many, many years ago. It feels like another lifetime. And I realized that we were all struggling, but nobody was really talking about it. So we all look really fancy and happy, but we were all struggling. And every time I went to any type of event, I used to do PR and communications and marketing, we all looked really good in the pictures. And then when I had individual conversations, some people would share really deep, things that they were happening in their own personal lives. And none of us knew about it. And we worked with them day in and day out. We thought that some of them were our friends and that we knew each other, but we really didn't. And I started looking into, okay, what's going on here? How can we change this? And when I went into many of the organizations that I was a part of and talked to the wonderful human resources department, they didn't have the tools. They didn't have the resources, and they were also struggling, trying to find ways to support all of us in that organization. So then that kind of led me to, okay, after 15 years of doing this, I just want to move into the nonprofit world. I started working in another nonprofit called ICU Baby, and their main mission, it was to kind of provide support for NICU parents. And it kind of led me into provide support for mental health for those NICU parents, right? Their NICU babies had that support, but the parents and siblings, they didn't have any support. And then lucky enough, I moved to NAMI about 2 years ago, and I kept doing that work. And the reality is I realized that we all have stories. We're hearing some of them today, but we all do. We all have mental health struggles. We can all have mental health symptoms, and we don't talk about it. And the way that I saw that my life mission could help others was by sharing my own story, sharing, I have loved ones that they allow me to share their own stories too, to support others, and to be able to open that conversation in a safe space such as this one.
Thank you all. Your stories are all so incredible, and they're just rattling around in my brain. It's really amazing. Just to highlight NAMI again, I said before I really love this organization. I worked for this organization, and honestly, I probably would have kept working there had I not been accepted to New World, because I really truly just enjoyed the work, and also I felt like everybody that worked there was just so passionate and giving and kind, and it was something I felt we needed more of in this field too. And so I really admire the work that NAMI does, so thank you. Moving sort of towards like solution-based sort of conversation now, how can we as individuals, as groups, as organizations, better empower and hold space for and support for people like all of you to healthily explore these other parts of their identities? Yeah, I'll say it better. How can we as individuals, groups, organizations better hold space for artists to healthily explore these other parts of their identities?
I'll start by saying I wish that organizations in particular would tell the truth. I think that we, again, because since the 1900s, we have believed for so long that the world was going to stay the same, that the path for musicians was going to be the same for every musician who walked through the door. That is not the truth. It has never been the truth. And I think the more that institutions can start training people in the truth, we'll start to see more space for people like those who have multifaceted talents, beliefs, identities, ideas. But until then, we'll churn out the same, like a factory. We'll see the top musicians, the top, getting the top orchestras, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I think if I were to answer first, initially, off of a gut reaction, I think there needs to be much more truth-telling.
Thank you. Anyone else?
So I think, first and foremost, one of the biggest value systems I've always had throughout my career has been, I'm going to experiment with a whole bunch of things, and anything that I think might have some value, I'm going to share immediately so that other people can make their own version of that. It's an odd mindset shift, because I remember the first time I launched the Fresh Ink Festival, which Grace Ann and I met there. It was a festival that was for composers and instrumentalists to basically learn everything that I didn't learn at Eastman in order to found an organization of my own. It was like 32 professional development workshops, 10 concerts in 14 days. I mean, it was pretty great. But I remember the first year I did it, somebody said, if I knew this, I would tell precisely no one. Aren't you worried people will steal your idea? And the answer is no. People need the tools, and they will never copy me. They are not me. They will make their own version of this. And so all of this is to say that that idea of being able to be in a space of leadership and sharing was kind of what led me to where I am right now with ACO, where it's an organization that is really focused on supporting the relationship between composers and orchestras nationally. Now, that seems like a very simple thing to do, but in a moment, let me put it this way, I would never have worked for an orchestra if it weren't for the pandemic, if it weren't for an opportunity to think about things differently, because the previous way of making music was simply not available to us. And that meant both thinking about who we are to our public, but it also meant who we are to our artists. And exactly as you were saying, not everybody gets to show up the same way. We're talking about what this industry does to everyone, but it doesn't end there, because we talk about diversity. We talk about what it means to pull people through the door. And ACO, I mean, let's put it this way. At this point in time, with the changes that I've made, we have 40% people of color on our stage at any given concert. 80% of the artists we support through our composer programs are people of color as well. But it doesn't end there, because what happens when they arrive from a culture perspective? What happens when they arrive from a personal, physical, and emotional safety perspective? And this is something that we are keenly trained towards right now as a field, and particularly as orchestras in New York City, given the recent news. You know, this is not an issue that any one person solves. This is not an issue that any one group solves. It's not only the musicians, it's not only the management, it's not only the union. It's like all of us need to put all of our BS aside and recognize that this is a priority, end of discussion, and figure out how to do this from a common sense perspective, right? That's absolutely necessary, because we have eaten out of the candy bowl so much that we've made ourselves sick. Like the principles of tenure and safety in our jobs that protected against horrible situations before have gotten to the point where they're overprotecting, to the point where they're protecting a few at the expense of the many, and that is extremely difficult. So I think first and foremost, culture starts with leadership at the top. So those of us who are in positions to be able to do what we can do, we should do it immediately and without fear. I think that that's a necessary thing. And I would also say that the time that it takes to do that is not short. So should you find yourself lucky enough to lead an organization, stay for a while. Stay for a while. What you can accomplish in 2 or 3 years is very little, because by the time you get to the end of your second year, you're just starting to do the things you built as opposed to the things your predecessor built. And people who are in positions like mine tend to bounce around quite a lot. Why don't you stay a while? That's how long it takes for musicians, for people, for individuals to get to know one another, iterate ideas, actually build on things, develop a culture. And if you show up with vulnerability, if you show up being willing to share your story and taking the time to let other people do that, then things may begin to get better. But that only happens if you are willing to invest of yourself and realize that a significant portion of your job isn't what you think. It's actually holding the people who are around you.
Thank you.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to how do we support artists, number one thing that I would do, because I've always been somebody who wanted to do my own thing. I didn't give myself permission until I gave myself permission, but reward curiosity. Create opportunities to recognize leadership where you see it, elevate it, give it resources, give it mentorship. Because the first thing that creative people do when they have a vision is, my vision is this ginormous thing that's 40 years in the future. I don't know how to do that. I better put that away, right? So we don't do it. There are empires of castles of, I don't know, whatever, of creative things that will change our world that never happened because we didn't feel safe, we didn't know how, and we stopped. So I would say reward curiosity, find opportunities to nurture that. And if the how always figures itself out, but nobody ever tells us that, because then, we're used to having somebody tell us how. Okay, conductor, tell me how. Okay, coach, tell me how. Okay, teacher, tell me how. There's nobody showing you how out there. So if you have a bold vision, get a coach, find a mentor, ask people how they did the how. Because nobody, especially 99% of my clients are founders, and most of them are founders who are musicians. So did I engineer that? No, they just came to me because I know how to speak music, right? I've been through the training, we know each other. But nobody ever told me there was a thing called a coach that was not there judging and like, play it softer, play it, that kind of coaching. But somebody who was invested in my success, who I didn't have to go home and like worry if it was going to be okay if I told them what was happening with me, even when I felt like a mess, even when I felt like not showing up, even when I felt like I didn't know what to do with myself, or I was finding myself miserable. I can't even stand myself right now. Like, there are people who want to hold space for you and who believe in your vision and will be relentless in helping you get there. And they're not going to give up on you even when you give up on you. And I did not know that was a thing, because that's not something I experienced on this pathway. So reward curiosity, hold space for people, share resources, be generous. Musicians never want to ask for help, because you're not supposed to say like, hey, I'm having a hard time with this passage. You're not allowed to do that, blend in. But your part that you're playing out there are a lot of people who want to help you play it. So ask for help. Be generous with yourself. Find what you need. And you're going to get it. But be courageous.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, to your point, even in the creation of Sound Mind, I can't tell you, there's such a long list of people, and obviously I have my thank yous at the end of this afternoon, but there's such a long list of people that helped will it into existence: coaches, therapists, random people I met that in the nonprofit field that don't know anything about classical music that I saw started a thing, and I just decided to ask them, how did you do that? I know nothing about this. Please just tell me everything you know. I'll buy you a coffee. Just whatever it took. And I think having that sort of almost like blind curiosity can be really helpful in this situation. So thank you so much for that. Rosa, this is more maybe a question for you, but for any of you, what advice would you give to musicians or just people who are experiencing or worried they're experiencing mental health challenges but might be hesitant to seek help?
That's our favorite question. And why? It's because we all have mental health struggles and it's hard to ask for help. But I think it goes back to educating ourselves about mental health. And that's important. The more we know, the more we feel empowered to reach out. So educate ourselves about what is mental health, some of the warning signs, to be able to better understand, but then also kind of reach out. There's so many resources. We can't do this work alone. I know that I'm speaking on behalf of Miami-Dade because this is part of who we are here as NAMI. And the reality is that every time that I go out, and I've been doing this for a while, I learn about a new resource. I learned something new, even just by talking to someone. I was on a interview a couple of weeks ago, and they asked me, so share the big stories, right? How, when you're in the community, what are those big stories that kind of make this all worth it? And it's not the big stories, right? It's the everyday stories that I get to hear, that I'm lucky enough that I get to hear for people in our community. Every time I go out and talk to someone in any event, I learn about my own community. I learn about myself. I learn about my loved ones by listening to someone else's story. So I think it's more of educating ourselves, but then also sharing. And I think you have heard everyone say, share, learn from others, but also share. You were saying before, and I love that, if you have a tool, if you have a resource, nobody's gonna copy that. They're gonna make it their own, and then there will be another amazing individual or organization that is gonna add to the long list of people that are helping in every community. So just I invite you to kind of learn more, to talk to each other, to go into your own community and learn about them. That's the only way that we can actually bring the resources that are needed we in NAMI Miami-Dade, we go out into each community first. We don't go out to just share resources. We go out, we go into their own events or meetings to learn about them, what they need. We always say, the Hispanic, I always talk about my own community. The Hispanic community doesn't talk about mental health. The reality is that we don't talk about mental health the way that we should talk about mental health. And those are the intersectionalities that we have. So we have to learn about each community and how can we show up for them. So I invite you to do that.
Thank you so much. This is for any of you, how can music institutions better integrate mental health support for their musicians?
I'm a huge fan of ritual. I loved what you said about how you start all of your meetings. Like all of our ACO meetings start with a creativity ritual of some kind. It could be verbal, it could be movement, it could be breathing, it could be mindfulness, it could be music making, it could be any of those things. And when you make that a part of how you do your work, things can show up differently. I think that there's a lot of truth to the idea that if you're looking to get to a different path by taking the same actions, you won't get there. So sometimes the how you do it is really important. And also just piggybacking on what you were saying earlier about, how to ask, create a space where it's actually quite normal for people to talk about what they're struggling with, whether it's something in their day that's professionally oriented, having trouble with a particular challenge, or something that's happening in their life. And if you're the person who needs to ask or share that, share it more than once, because different people will give you different responses. And it might be that one of them works for you where it wouldn't have worked for someone else, or you'll come up with an amalgamation of all of those things and come together. And maybe the last thing I'll say is, if we're in a position to help provide those resources, we should do that. I mean, we as musicians are very used to taking lessons on our instruments. We should become very used to taking lessons on life. One of these things seems harder than the other, so why not?
Thank you. Anyone else? How can music institutions better integrate mental health support for musicians?
Well, this is more on the wellness side and less on the mental health side, but could be both. If there is somebody initiating an idea like a meditation circle, which is what I did here, by the way, I asked John Keyser, my boss, if I could host a meditation circle here once a month, and he said, sure, come into this place. We'll have, we'll provide the sound, and you go for it. And there were, we had 20, 30 people here at one point. So just once a month, allow people to use the space, provide them with whatever resource it is, just encourage it. Because whether or not people were there to talk, we all had a moment of stillness together. And because music is part stillness and part sound, it was a really beautiful community building opportunity as well that we didn't plan to do. We just were like, hey, I'm gonna do this anyway. I'm gonna come here at 8:30 on Tuesday before our staff meeting. Anyone wanna join? Open to everybody. And we had musicians here, we had staff here, we had people who were on our facilities team here. So you just never know.
I'll add to this. Everyone has already said everything, but the two things that I think I keep hearing back is two words: community and belonging. And I think that, it is just simply not enough for a space to be diverse. It is much more important that that space feels like it belongs to the people who exist in it. And I think if we can encourage that in these spaces, I think we'll see much more communication between people and between communities. People will feel more comfortable asking for what they need if they feel like they belong. But if we keep telling them that they are not there yet, that they haven't reached where they're supposed to be, that they have to keep striving in order, I think that creates an environment where people feel like, well, I'm not here yet, so I'll wait until they see me before I ask for anything. You belong here, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And if we can encourage that, I think that would encourage people.
And I'd just like to point out, share your own story. And I know we said this many times, but Alex, you did that. That's why we are here today. And by opening up, you allow others to do the same. So we can do that not only musicians, but in any organization or community, when it starts with us sharing how vulnerable we are and our own struggles, that's when actually that connection starts to happen.
Thank you all so much. Can we please have, before we do Q&A, a big round of applause for our panel. Thank you, everyone. Now we have time for questions from the audience. Feel free to raise your hand with any questions for our panel. Yes, in the back. Just say it loud.
I don't know if I really have a question. I'm more so going to do a little testimonial really quick. I'm a composer. I just wanted to let you know the work that the ACO does and the Melissa's organization is incredible. I was telling Grace Ann that I was part of the thing with Atlanta Symphony, and I was like, I don't think I could have faced that orchestra by myself. So having them there, having Loki there, having the ACO there be a just kind of I can filter through them. I can talk with them. They can talk to the organization. I can just kind of be the piece that they performed was a piece commissioned by the Florida Orchestra, and I had 3 panic attacks writing that piece. It was hard, and then to go into that with the ACO with the Atlanta Symphony and not have any stress at all, knowing that I was being taken care of by this organization was really special. So I just kind of wanted to say thank you.
Oh, that's so sweet.
And you did a great job, Grace.
Yes.
Silently struggling. Seriously, silently struggling. And I'll do one last thing. If you're a composer, build a community, talk to musicians, talk to your friends, talk to people. Don't silo yourself. Don't just go into a room and write music. Go outside, be outside, be with people who you care about, who love you. Do not silo yourself, because it's a silent thing happening with composers, and not a lot of people talk about it. So I'm really grateful for this. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions for our panel? Yeah, Beatrice, go for it.
I love what you all are saying about embracing curiosity and being open to so many different doors along these paths that can take you to different places that you never expected. As someone who has a problem saying no because I want to explore every single one of those doors, how do you suggest finding that kind of balance in your life? We're talking a lot about finding more balance and having hobbies and being a person outside of being an artist, while at the same time wanting to be embedded in the community that you're a part of. So how do you suggest finding that as an individual, and also how organizations can support that?
As the person who is exactly that person, I want to say to you, it is so important that you have a community that knows when you need rest. It has been so important to me to have friends say, LaRob, that is an amazing opportunity that you are definitely, qualified for. You need to say no. Because I can't. Or it's so much harder for me to say no than it is for my friends who love me. And I think it's so important to have people around you. I call it my little board, my board of directors, some of my closest friends and loved ones. They will look out for you in a way that sometimes you can't look out for yourself. So find your board of directors to tell you no.
I have something to add. I love that, and I'm the same way. If it's creative and it's possible, why not do it now? Right. So the thing, and as a coach, I work with a lot of people who are highly creative who want to do things, and they're just like, how and when, and who are the people, and in what order? And the thing I want to encourage you to remember is you don't have to do everything all at once. If you're committed to yourself as a growing, evolving individual, you don't need to rush, right? Second thing is, consider segments. If you're really intentional about your work and you're like, for the next 2 years, I'm gonna learn about whatever. Do that for 2 years, do your R&D, experiment, test models, see what sticks against the wall, see how you feel, obviously, always. And then go on to another segment. If you're intentional about your work and you're like, these are the 4 things I know I want to integrate. These are the 4 things I want to experiment. These are the 4 things I want to master. You don't have to do them all at once. And in fact, you won't do all of them well, right? So my thing is choose one thing, constancy of aim and effort, which is what musicians do. That's how things manifest, by the way, constancy of aim and effort. Just decide what, when, in what order, and gather data. And then you have a lot more scientific opportunity to make decisions about what now. Because that will, whatever you do will lead you to the next things. But if it's everything all at the once, you end up being usually overwhelmed. And yes, community is absolutely important.
I'll also say that this is all really great, first of all, incredible advice. And sometimes we end up in that situation because they're achievement-based things, like a job, an opportunity, a gig, whatever the case may be. If you're a little bit more like me and the work that you're doing is like impact-based as opposed to achievement-based, part of the fear of not doing something is, if I don't do this, no one will do it. And so for me, some of the hardest decisions are understanding what is my task. Like, what is my task versus someone else's task? Sometimes that decision gets made because I'm uniquely suited to do that thing, and I have to be very clear and intentional when that is the case. And then sometimes I just really want something to exist in the world, so it's going to be my process of saying, it would take me 1,000,000 times longer to do this than if I were to call this other person whose task it really is. You know what I mean? Who's actually really well set up to do it. And that's the great power of like having people around you and collaboration. So just a thought.
Yeah, and something, just to add even more advice for you, something we talk a lot about in our Sound Mind workshops is we have a whole workshop about holding space, because we talk about holding space for others, but we also talk a lot about holding space for yourself and what that looks like. And we talk about setting boundaries for yourself, and also this idea of like consent, but for yourself, which has to do with boundaries too. And I don't always succeed at giving myself a 24-hour rule with gigs where I wait 24 hours to say yes instead of responding immediately. Like I understand some things are time-based, like first person to respond gets the gig, but I do try to give myself 24 hours to really think about how much work will this actually be long-term, and do I really, to your point about the board of directors, do I really have the time and the bandwidth for this? Yeah, thank you.
Can I add one more thing? And this is just a general thing, and I actually just tried this or just did this, and it was so helpful to me. I got together with my board of directors, and we just sat down and wrote on one side, what are things we need? And on the other side, what are things that we can provide? And it was so obviously beautiful, and we were all just like crying the whole time. But to like step back from that and look at these sheets, you know, we did like Google Sheets, and we were just looking at them, and we were like, oh my God, there's so much here that we each can provide for each other. I mean, one of them was one of mine was, I want somebody who can help me dress. Very simple, right? But to see that need written down, and then on the opposite side, see what it was that my group, my community could provide, even if it had nothing to do with that, was just a really awesome task. So I encourage all of you to sit down with your friends and really just think about it. It doesn't have to be dire needs. It can really just be, what do you need in this exact moment, or what do you need tomorrow? Write it down and then see what it is that your friends can provide for you. Just a little activity for you to walk away with.
That's really cool. I like that a lot. Thank
Yeah.
you. Other questions? Yeah, hi, Kelsey.
I got a microphone, but I can speak up. Thank you so much for this panel. I've been really inspired by it. Something I think that we're kind of talking about, but not necessarily naming, is like a financial pressure that musicians face. I don't believe that it's impossible to do creative work and financially support yourself, but I know I'm also thinking from the perspective of a teacher of students who are significantly financially challenged. And of course, there are many other intersectional issues at play here too. But I would just love to hear your thoughts about creative and meaningful work, and mental health, and financial pressures, and real and perceived, and just what your thoughts are about that.
Yes. I simply say yes. I mean, this is something I talk about all the time because as much as we, exist in our creative brains, there is the harsh reality of the society that we live in and the capitalistic society that we live in that tells us that we have to keep striving for more and more and more, even when we don't get it. Yeah, community is also really helpful here. I think that, it's very taboo, but really consider and talk with your folks about what it looks like to have community-based funding, community-based resources, and institutions should also consider this as well. There are a multitude of institutions that are really hoarding resources for a lot of people who need those resources. So I'm always going to be an advocate for community building and community resources. So that's going to be my answer probably every time.
I love that. Go ahead, please.
Okay. So most of the people that I work with have experienced trauma around money. And part of it is, if you're going to study that, music, you're done here, or I won't pay for it, or you're on your own, you're out of this family. Like, there's so many layers of shame that go with music, right? I truly believe that if you are a person with a passion and a little bit of courage, you can find a way to create wealth. But that's a got to get the trauma out of the body first, and you have to truly believe that. And community, surround yourself with people who've done that. Like, there's no right way to be for you. Your soul decides, right? Why did you come here? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish? What fills your heart with joy? When do you lose track of time? Those are the things that are like a highlighter from the universe being like, come this way. People have been asking me for directions since I was a child, asking for advice. I never knew there was a thing called coach. I certainly didn't think a coach and a healer was like an actual job. But like, I remember going to music school, moving to New York City, being responsible for my money for the first time. I had $7 in my bank account. I did not eat. I was terrified. Things in the big city, and there was no dorm, there was no meal plan, there was no health plan. It was me living in the city, basically in poverty, right? I came out of that. I took some big risks, but it really, like, moving there and having to be responsible as an adult with no preparation traumatized me. And it wasn't until I realized that the only investment that is 100% or more always is investing in myself. And no one else was ever going to do that, especially if I didn't. I believe if you're a creative person, you can create things in this world of technology and support yourself if you're willing to just try something. You may not know if it's going to work out or not. And I know it's like, where's the stability? You are always the stability. I really believe you create the stability in your life. And if you're open to it, and again, lots of things that might need to be sorted through and mindset work, professional help, perhaps sometimes, but there's nothing holding you back. And the idea that you have to follow one path, that's just a habit of thinking. So I would say if you're open to it, come up with all the things you're scared of, list your fears, and then question each one. Like, is this actually true? Is this mine? Ooh, that one. But I don't have all the answers, but test it out. Question your beliefs and test them, because then you have real data. But I feel you on the money thing, yeah.
I'll also add, as a person who has for many years really been dedicated to helping other people build their careers. Okay. One of the very first questions I tend to ask everybody that I meet for the first time in an intake session or whatever is, what space would you like this to take in your life? And people are very surprised by that question because they usually think, oh, I got to go all professional or it's not going to work. But actually, you do get to decide that. And one of the people in my life, I had an early friend and collaborator and colleague who wrote textbooks in his pajamas on his couch, and then was able to take only the gigs that he really wanted to artistically because he knew that he was fine to do that. And again, coming back to that stigma thing, some people might say, oh, well, they're not just doing this for a living full time, so they're like clearly failing. No, this was an individual who was like recording and programming new music and playing at a super high level, but didn't have to take the gigs that were not going to feed him artistically in order to feed him physically. So that's just one thing I'll say is like, don't be afraid to do other things. I'll also say that despite the fact that my father told me I would be eating dry pasta in a box in a leaky basement if I chose this career, like, you know, during the great crash of 2009 or whatever it is, people around me who had the stable jobs lost their livelihoods in an instant. And I had 400 plates spinning in the air between all of the different gigs and concerts and orchestras and students and teaching posts that I had, that when one of them went away, there was always something else that would come. So job security happens in different ways for us, as long as you are willing to explore those alternatives.
Thank you. Yeah, and to that point as well, yeah, I work with a coach a lot. In addition to a therapist, very different sort of conversations between the two. But as somebody who has experienced money trauma, the coach asked me a similar question to what you just said, which is, what space would you like this to take in your life? How much space is it currently taking up? And I really had to take a step back and examine that and really think about it. It's really interesting. Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, Taryn.
I think one of the neat things about our field is just the sense of like lineage and apprenticeship, but can also keep us behind as well. I'm just curious of like how you would, suggestions you would have of calling out and calling in behaviors and keeping spaces more honest, especially when you're not the person that everyone's seeking out.
So I think it's how we show up for our community, right? So it starts with us, and I always bring that back, because the reality is that we can change things. You were sharing that question that you said before. You know, when you work in nonprofit, that's the first thing people will ask, like, oh, do you make enough money to pay for your bills, right? We have the power to change things, but it starts with us and how we show up for our own community and as individuals. And we do that by being very authentic with our struggles, with our challenges, with what we have gone through, what we have learned, and being there, right? Holding, and again, I know they mentioned space, but being in that space and holding your own individual space, but also allowing others to support you and to have your back. So I will say that, and that comes from just everyone as a community, not specifically for musicians, but yeah, kind of showing up and being that person that kind of calls out a behavior, right? Or, you know, if you're in a position of leadership, you know, of course, do that. But if you're not, and I think we're all leaders, we don't have to be in a position of leaders, we're all leaders, speak up, right? And share, you know, this is not working out, or I have this struggle, how can we change this? And I'll be a part of that change. What can I do?
I will also say that these positions and pedestals that we put people on are pretend. They are not real. They do not exist. You have the power to take them down. And I say that, and it sounds very like, ugh, but also the reality is they're pretend. And it is this calling out that removes those people from those spaces. This idea of lineage, it's such a tool of the pipeline of the classical industry to believe, to assign even numbers in some cases to a figure or a position that gets the musicians who are in the training programs to believe that they have to ascend to these, you know, positions of power, et cetera, not knowing that it's all fake. Really, I so agree with you, Rosa. Like, say something. Nobody gets free alone. If you sit, and as you were saying, Ahmed, if you sit in a silo, you will not get free. If you do not speak up, nothing will change. And until we can tell the classical industry that things need to change by everybody speaking on one accord, everything will stay the same. We will continue to see articles like we've just seen, and the same institutions will be having the same problems. But you have way more power to say what you feel, to say that things are wrong, to say that there needs to be change. And again, community, belonging. The more you find people and talk with people who are experiencing or feel similar or different, you'll find that there's much more work that needs to be done that can be done together. So that's
amazing. Just building on that and building on that. I'm from the John Mack School of Oboe Thinking or whatever, like the 2 American oboe schools. I'm in the Mack School. So like, I get what you're saying. We can look back, and I believe from my own experience, you can honor the ancestors, so to speak. And also, when I do healing work, sometimes I do generational healing. There are things that didn't start with us that we're experiencing, whether it's a belief or a disease or whatever it is. So I think that in musician life, we also have generational patterns of maybe some unhealthy thinking or some mindset stuff that's not so great, or just ways of addressing power that are super unhealthy, right? So what my style has been is being like, I recognize my ancestors, they did the best they could with the information they had. And some of them truly, I'm talking about music now, some of them truly believed that was the only way, and there was some sort of like religious sanctity about keeping things pure. I think that's really deserving of some looking under the microscope. But I think you can honor the ancestors, so to speak, saying like, I learned this, and also talk out loud about your own judgment, right? So we're all adult people, and we recognize that also there might be some trauma that's passed on from teacher to student, and so these lineages are very complex and very nuanced and very personal, and everybody's having a different experience with them perhaps. But for me, it's like I can recognize and just be grateful for my teachers, recognizing that there are parts of my musical training that were not exactly up to par in terms of where we are now and our ability to talk about, lines of power and what's appropriate, and all of that's fine. But when I talk about these things, it's in an effort to spread healing and to recognize that, maybe some of the systems we set up in this way for these lineages, maybe the lineage deserves to be broken a little bit, but we still honor where we came from, but we don't have to replicate, I guess is what I'm saying.
I'll just offer too that the biggest mistakes I've ever made in my professional life, I made out of fear of losing someone. And sometimes that person is above you. Maybe it's your teacher, maybe it's your superior. But I will also say on the converse, later in life, that the biggest accomplishments I've ever made have been when I articulated that I was unafraid of consequence in that situation. So it might have been me saying, I understand that, based on what I have to say here, I might not have a job tomorrow. That's okay. I know I can make it somewhere else I'm not concerned about my career here. It's not going to prevent me from doing what is right. I had a situation where I had a superior threaten when I was trying to make progress on a certain equity area, threatened to bring me up in front of the board and whatever, bend to my will, I think was the word that was being used. And I said, that sounds good. And I just let that hang. You know what I mean? Because it's like, I'm not going to prevent myself from doing the right thing out of fear of losing something myself. I believe in myself too much. I will be okay if that happens, and it meant I wasn't in the right place.
I had a teacher who I was very close to tell other people in my studio they were worried about me sharing my mental health story because they were scared I wasn't going to get hired anywhere because of it. And it was done with the best intentions. I know that. He was trying to look out for me. He was trying to give me the best opportunity at getting an orchestra job. And that's how he believed and how he was trained that you had to be, you had to blend into what you said before. And that was in college. And I've come a long way since then, and none of this would exist if I had stopped talking about it. So, for what that's worth, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I think we're about ready to wrap up. I would love to just give one last really big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank a few people as well. In addition to our panel, I want to thank New World. I want to thank Heather and Tamika, the production crew, the fellows who performed and assisted. I want to thank Sound Mind, Jeanette and Amber, the board of Sound Mind, all of those amazing folks. I want to thank Grace Ann, our panel again. Everybody tuning in and all of you here today, thank you so much for joining us. It's just been a dream come true to have this event come to life. Please stay. We're going to have refreshments brought in just a moment, and we can mingle for a little bit. But thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you for putting up the slide. I forgot to say, if you enjoyed today's event, please take our really short 60-second survey, scan the QR code, help us produce more events in the future. Thank you. Thank you.